The situation on Ukrainian front line remains tough, despite what we have been telling about Ukraine having major successes and successfully fighting off a Russian invasion. Russians are still trying to attack the upcoming mobilization, while it's not going to be devastating as a lot of people have been claiming. I made a separate video about it. You can find the link in the description. And in that video, I was talking that the mobilization in Russia will not bring the desired benefits, and specifically with the numbers that are being flown around by the Russian side of about 500,000 mobilized, which is much less than we were expecting. It's not going to bring the change on the front line that a lot of people are expecting. It will, however, continue making the fight difficult for Ukrainian armed forces. That is why it is crucial that support for Ukraine is there. And we today are going to be talking about the political situation, with President Zelensky visiting the United States, speaking once again with Donald Trump and some of the European leaders. So let's kind of separate a little bit the fluff from the actual usable important things that will impact the war. Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Ukraine is doing a lot to try to find some kind of diplomatic pathway to ending this war. And a lot of people get really worried because President Zelensky talks about securing some kind of peace, starting negotiations process. At the same time, we hear about negotiations from the Russian side where they're proposing the Istanbul format, the supposed secondary party to Russia, Kazakhstan, is just openly revolting and telling Putin to his face that he should start some kind of peace negotiations process. And we heard from the Trump administration that they might start dealing with Ukraine once again, trying to, I don't want to say persuade both parties because that's not what's happening. But essentially, a lot of people start worrying about where this is going and whether Ukraine can really get what it wants if there is some kind of negotiations. And for that, we need to understand where Ukraine currently stands. Ukraine right now, I don't want to say self-sufficient, but the legs that Ukraine is standing on are becoming more tougher and tougher. The Ukrainian industry, specifically weapons industry, has been really growing rapidly. They're able to supply a lot of important components for them to keep fighting on, with pretty good secured flow of funds now approved from the European and other allies for the next 2 years minimum. So I would put it like this: for the next 2 years, Ukraine is pretty secure, self-sufficient. No other specific state right now, like collectively, yes, there is some pressure that can be done on Ukraine, but no one state has the ability to really twist Ukraine's arm and force them into the bad deal. And once again, I want to repeat that Ukraine will not accept a bad deal. President Zelensky knows really well what is at stake, and any kind of freezing of this conflict, any kind of agreeing to a bad deal will just bring the war back to Ukraine some years later. That is why, while he is searching for some kind of ability to stop the killing of civilians, specifically of this war, he is not looking at this as like we just need to capitulate at whatever cost. That is not what Ukraine is doing. Right now, inside of US, there is a lot of internal discussions. Like, Ukraine is definitely not on the front line of US news, and arguably it's not even on the fifth line of the US news. But nonetheless, there is still quite a big support for Ukraine inside of the perception of actually both parties. So now, in talks with the Trump administration, we need to remember that the Trump administration basically is refusing to utilize the assigned 400 millions in aid to Ukraine to help Ukraine. Yet they're willing to continue selling the weapons to Ukraine. And I do believe that this is the best case scenario. I talked about it the first moment when Trump was elected into office. I said that if there is anything that Ukraine would be able to get and should be aiming to get from Trump's administration, is that there would be an option to buy some of the sophisticated weapons that Ukraine just cannot produce themselves, and then hopefully Ukraine will get an additional benefits out of those, but secure the main core equipment themselves. And they have been moving specifically in that direction, and that's why they're able to continue fighting no matter what. It's all about just the improvement of their situation. But more importantly, with Ukraine now also trying to negotiate this agreement, which I know technically is agreed upon about the production of the Patriot missiles, but until the first Patriot missile comes off of Ukrainian production lines, I am not going to be so optimistic towards it. In any case, Ukraine is working very hard to secure their own defense industry and defense position. So when we're talking about some kind of negotiations that are going to be happening in the future or are happening right now, we need to understand that it's all aimed for Ukraine to improve their current position, which is very stable, that even the Russian mobilization will not be able to topple. Therefore, I don't think that we should worry about whatever Ukraine is doing with negotiations, whoever they're talking with. There is right now no option for any country to pressure Ukraine into a bad deal or anything like this. So trust in Ukraine, support Ukrainian armed forces. It's going to be a tough year still for Ukraine to fight the Russians, but they're definitely starting to break the neck of this snake. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.